So where does AI slop come from? And I might start by just asking, where does slop in general come from? And I think most slop is a result of a first draft. It is a result of having an idea, blurting it, unconsidered, and then moving on to the next thing. It is the editorial process that undoes slop. It's review. So I think when we look at AI stuff and we say, hey, that's slop, when we're looking at writing, when we're looking at generated code, what have you, it's a result of us saying, here's my prompt, and then having it generate code and thinking that's the end of the process. In fact, there's necessarily a review that we should do beforehand. And the question is, who's going to do that review? Because when I say we, I mean me and the AI. So if I don't want to have slop and I need to have a review, that means I basically have, sort of three big choices, right? The first one, 3 doors I can go through. The first one is I could just close my eyes and push the button, right? Say, I know it needs a review, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep on moving, right? And that means I'm, doing it really without consideration and putting me back in the box I was at the beginning and just sort of hoping it works. And a lot of time it does work. AI stuff is pretty good. Good like 9 out of 10 times. It's moving more towards like 99 out of 100 times. But that 1 out of 10 or that 1 out of 100 doesn't work so well, and that's where the problem is. And that's the thing I'm afraid of. I'm pushing it for one of those. Second option is that I review it, or a human reviews it. This is expensive and slow. And the thing is, like, AI is so good at making things now, right? And making really good stuff that, like, I'm going to be looking at, 100 PRs of code or of drafts or whatever it wants me to be giving my feedback on for me to go make a decision on. And that's way more than I can reasonably, look at all individually in order to figure out what the right decision is, right? Or else I'll be spending a whole lot of time on it. And it gets worse, because if most of those are like, hey, this looks good to me, then it's very hard to keep my brain alert for the issues when in fact most of it is pretty good and is like, okay, this can go, this can go, this can go. When you're saying looks good to me really often, it's very hard to keep your brain on alert for the critical that's coming up. And then we have the third door. That's what I'm going to be talking about today, which is how we can use AI to review AI, and really having a different AI do the review. This allows us to make use of the best of AI. So we have an AI that's doing the writing and an AI that's doing the reviewing, and turning them into a little bit more of a closed loop that has the opportunity to take a lot more stuff off my desk, and more importantly, keep me focused on the stuff that matters. Just a very quick ask. If you're finding this useful and interesting, I hope you'll like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you have, please tell other people about it. It helps spread the word about what we're doing here and help other people learn more about what's really interesting about the hard parts of AI. So let's talk about the biggest opportunity in the room. And it's not the AI, it's us. It's our ability to make better decisions, to be able to look at the field and say, wait, we're asking the wrong question. How can we think bigger? How can we bring more value, right, to this conversation? And anybody who's sort of been in sort of a lead developer type position or been more of an executive type, that's your real job. Because if you're just sort of in the mix of the details with everybody, then you're not adding value over the folks who are already there, because they're already doing a lot of that. So how can you elevate yourself? And like that becomes the big opportunity here, right? Is what you really want is the machine to be taking care of a lot of those details, because it can take care of all this ordinary stuff, can create all of this really useful content or answers or what have you. And what we want is for it to take care of the things that are more mechanical, and when there's something that requires more judgment, something where it doesn't have quite enough to do, just like if you were hiring a junior person to be doing this job, you would want them to kick it upstairs. Frankly, you're hiring a senior person to do this job. That's a person who is even more aware of the fact that they need to elevate those decisions that require that higher level of consideration. Not just a bunch of, you need to sign this, look good to me, right? There might be some legal requirements for that. But most of the time when you're looking for decisions, it's like, this is the stuff that really matters. And how can I bring it to you so that you can actually, use your time well to make a better decision about not just this one detail, but how it affects the whole of the system. And that, for me, is the biggest opportunity when it comes to using AI to review AI, is so that it can be staying more at that tactical level and be able to elevate when it becomes more strategic. And that's the real value of the human judgment. So, adversarial review requires two different entities, usually this would be like two different people having that job. And you see this all the time in tech companies. You find it in editorial institutions like newspapers, the separation between reporters and editors, where they just have different jobs, right? The reporter's loyalty is to the story, right? To whatever it is that they're creating. And just like the coder's loyalty is to their PR, like what it is that they are contributing in terms of feature or fix or whatever it is they're trying to put into there. And then you have the editor or the reviewer that's being done by the more senior developer in the case of a tech company, right? And that's going to have their responsibility is to the mission, is to the project, is to defend, right, against like whatever weirdnesses or errors might be coming in the door, but also making sure this is the right thing for us. And these are roles that historically have been done by people across these various disciplines, but really can be taken on by AI. And just like we've been very comfortable using AI for creating things, and usually that's sort of the vibe code experience as you say what you want and the AI gives it back to you, we can also use AI for the review, right? And then that way we get these two robots going into an argument, and they're able to have the argument at such high quality and such speed because their contexts are separated. Right, their brains are separated. So one has the history of like all the stuff I've been making, whatever, and the other one doesn't have any of that. Right, it's just separate model, separate context, knows about maybe the code base or the project or whatever, knows which PR you're working with, knows what issue that goes with, know what project that goes with. That project has a North Star, etc. Reads the documentation and says, is this right, based on the context of what we're in. And, it comes back with really high quality feedback because just like any good reviewer, it's not just a matter of saying yes or no. It's a matter of why. No, this is not good or it needs to be. And really, it's not even that's just saying no. It's about saying this needs to be reworked or this passes. But also, there are two other outcomes that are really, really important. So one is reshape, right? We need to reconsider how we're going about this. Not just this is a tick list of things you need to fix, but rather I think you're going about it wrong. Why don't you redo it? Go back to first principles on it. And the author will take that all in good humor and keep on moving because what it wants to do is submit a good thing, right? That's always our experience with AI, like the token-seeking puppy. But the second thing that might do that's sort of outside of this bound is might say we need to elevate this. This requires a decision that we are not equipped to answer. It might even do that after having rounds of, not getting anywhere. And I actually have as part of the skill, and the skill is that I use, or as of this recording, is part of the description at the bottom of this video. You can get a link to that from GitHub. And the part of the idea is like it can only go back and forth so many times, right? So it's adversarial, they ping pong back and forth a handful of times to be able to come up to either, yes, this is passing the test, yes, I no longer have concerns about this, yes, we're doing this the right way. And if it has sufficient level of concern, be able to say thumbs up. That's why I call it not just adversarial review, but I call the skill adversarial PR, because it has the ability to actually promote things into staging. Or it needs to elevate to a decision, that brings me back in. And that gets incorporated into other things in the brief. I'll get into that later. There's some kind of problem. We need to totally reconsider this. And that means we can, really get some value here, right? We get the writing, we get the independent review, and then as appropriate, we get to that, elevated human decision where we get to use my insight when it really matters. So the way I set up the review is, through the skill that you see that is included with this video. And you can sort of see how the skill goes through what are the questions that we want to make sure that the editor is reviewing, what are the considerations for it, what does good look like, what are examples of challenges, and also examples of what sort of severity of pushback do you want to make here, right? Because you can come up with all sorts of feedback that maybe it's not quite done, but really if you're just sort of pushing back like a bunch of trivia, a bunch of P3s, things that are not really all that critical, maybe it's time for us to be moving on, right? So not only identifying what the issues are, but also how important they are. And this comes from the context of, things about the code, about the style, about the mission, right? About the fidelity to the issue, about fidelity to the project overall based on its, North Star, right? And to do this, it's got to know, from the issue what the objective is, right? Does this actually accomplish that objective? And even, frankly, is that objective still good based on how we saw this thing got sorted, right? So this is all context the reviewer needs, and the reviewer gets it largely, in my case, by getting it from GitHub. And this allows us to have the review be done through the command line. So it's just like you have, you're working directly in your Claude Code or your, ChatGPT, Codex app or, Anti-Gravity or whatever it is you want to be using. And then the agent then calls one of these other environments, right, a different vendor, using the command line version of your application. And so this allows me actually to use a subscription level from both ChatGPT and Codex, right, to get them to be helping or rather, be adversarial towards each other, which means they're both helping me, right, make better stuff. And by going through the command line, you sort of have headless. It knows about the repository. It knows about what PR it's supposed to look at. It knows what, its parameters are. That's what I'm giving in the prompt, is like what it means to be a good reviewer. And then the PR is mentioned in there, and it just gets all that stuff actually from GitHub. Or if you use Linear, you can get it from that. Or if you're using Jira, you can get it from that. It doesn't really matter because all these things can hook well into the AIs. But the idea is that you're just sort of giving it a prompt in the context of the repository, and then it's able to do a good job reviewing. I find that, especially with modern AI, I don't want to give it too many instructions, right? I want to give it some structure. What does good look like? And then I want to give it, some ideas of how to, give the output. But mostly, I want to get its maximum judgment involved. And when I do that, and I say, yes, your job is to go find problems, your job is to make it better, your job is to have fidelity to the issue, then it will do that. Now, there's also an issue of permissions here. So the editor does not have the ability to go edit the code, right? Even though it's in the name editor. They're a reviewer, right? So they get read-only access to the repository, and that usually shows up in the way that we just call the command line. And, I haven't done lots of studying as to how the exact command lines for all these things work. Of course, what I have is the AI go look up what's the right way to do the command line. And then, that goes into the skill. And the skill just provides the suggestions, because as these tools change, I want the author to be able to call the editor in the way that's supposed to be called. And that way they get that feedback back and forth, right? And I tell the author that it wants to get good feedback from the editor. So it's not trying to trick the editor and just giving it a quick pass. It wants the editor to explain the pass, explain the fail, explain all these things, because that's how it gets smarter. And then that way I've created incentives on both sides. One, to be the defender of the mission. The other, to be looking for the feedback and to be the eager student. And when these two have that relationship going on, I find they provide much, much better results. Okay, so when I think about the structure of what's going to send over, that the reviewer is going to send over to the author, I think about, what are the potential results here? And I've talked about them a little bit before, but I think it's just really important for us to think about the differences among them and how it's not just about a yes or a no, right? It's not just I'm giving a whole bunch of input, I'm trying to get a parameterized yes or parameterized no. I'm trying to get a, one, what is the, one possibility is that it passed. But even if it passed, I want to know why it passed and what you think about it. Because that way, and then I have the author looking for that stuff. Is it failing, right? Was there a problem with it of some kind that you might need to go work, right? That's kind of a rework. And there's sort of a more extreme version of this, which is abandon of, this isn't working. You just need to put it down and elevate it as a discussion or circle back around. Abandon actually doesn't come up that often anymore, because usually it's either rework it, i.e., go back and make these edits. I've given you this tick list. And when I give you a tick list for the rework, it's usually coming back with like levels of errors, right? P0s, P1s, P2s, P3s, that are of the varying severity of what I think this requires. And that also gives the author the opportunity to say, hey, look, if we've been through nine rounds on this, and previously you had P0s, and now all you have is P3s, maybe we're just sort of getting to the trivia stuff. And that can cause a reconsideration, right, of how we're going to move forward, right? It might even kick it up to the orchestrator and say, hey, do I need to keep on doing the review? And that can be pretty cool, right? So the idea of fix as having that detail of these are the issues the listing need to work, and and how severe those issues are. But while I used to have abandon be a significant thing, like got to go kick it up to the human, there's now the idea of reshape. And reshape has really changed things for me, even in the course of the last couple of weeks, right? Where like the goal might still be right. We have the issue seems to be about the right issue, but the way we're approaching the problem, the answer we're giving to the question is not correct, right? And this isn't about like going and fixing the code. We need to reconsider what is our strategy for the job to be done. And I actually talk about all this stuff inside the skill, because this is actually one of the most valuable things I think that come out of a review process, is having the AIs through their dialogue elevate the discussion. So it's not just about how do we fix this piece of code, but how do we reconsider the way we're going to use the code. And when they do that, and they actually, as part of my brief, I get to find out when those kinds of conversations have happened, I get pretty pleased, because those almost always are significant improvements to how the whole system works. Because reshape causes them to ask external questions, to be reconsidering the approach, and to just throw away the old code and build a new one. Even to the point of like, we're going to get rid of the old PR, and we're going to, for the same issue, make a new PR, and that's the way that with this different structure of solution. And to have the AI be willing to go back and do those multiple rounds significantly increases the quality of the code, especially for these more complex situations. And when they've tried everything, okay, now they need to be kicking it upstairs, right? Because this is all still just not working as they're talking amongst themselves, right? Maybe as they keep on bopping between two issues, they've tried the reshape, and now they need to actually be elevating the discussion. And that human decision point is really where we get to have a lot of fun, because then when they're saying, okay, well, now we need to elevate this to, say, Ray, or to human review, we need to we need to go research it, right? Because so we can actually provide him with information about what's going on, and what we tried, and why we thought that was right, and what actually is wrong. So here's the secret. When they do that, and this is a trick I used to use also within state change, right? I would tell people that I want them to go research their problem and post up before they actually bring it to my office hours. And when I have the AI also go through that process when it's about to give up and give things to me, a significant fraction of the time it says, oh wait, I found an answer. We can go work this. And then it's able to give it more turns. So the prospect of bringing things to me, and the necessity of having a process of how they prepare a brief to bring the question to me, itself improves their ability to solve the problem. And that I found to be really cool, right? It's not just pass-fail. It's not even pass-fail or reshape. It's pass-fail, reshape, and, it thinks of it as abandon, but it's really elevate. And when they elevate, and when they are, putting that together, there's an opportunity to keep even more of that loop closed, which means the decisions that come to me are even more meaningful. So there are a couple of ways I use, adversarial review. One is where a lot of the examples I've been giving so far, which have been very technical, right? I have it, the various subagents that are out there, each working on a different issue. I mostly work off of, GitHub when doing technical things. And I have issues get created in GitHub, and basically each, subagent or task or whatever is tied to one of those GitHub issues. And sort of was working that issue, and the PR goes with an issue, and sort of this all lines up nicely and technically. And then they are collecting into what I usually call like a graveyard shift. And, the graveyard shift is an example of my brief-based approach, where I'm collecting multiple things that's trying and then putting it together into a single document. And the most important part of that document is to be elevating the decisions that come out at the end of that shift, right? What are the things it needs me to be weighing in on, things it needs me to be thinking about? And what's really cool about that is that is that by combining everything into a brief, it brings the themes, right? So it's not just, here are 17 questions that came up. Part of the brief review process I have it do is, and I have the brief itself go through adversarial review. So those 15 issues get turned into these 5 areas of that these things are all like, right? This category of things seems to be the problem, and that I want you to be weighing in on. I gotta tell you, what we can even do at that point is that part of the brief review is the brief review asks, all right, well, now that we've summarized this, do you still need to end the shift? Do you still need to bring it to me? Right? Because then out of that brief review, you can realize that there in fact is this theme. This theme is the way to be solving these multiple problems. Now let's go and try attacking those problems based on the proposals and the what we've learned in order to bring those things back to me, right? And I call that a decision gating process. That I find to be even more valuable, right? So I have adversarial reviews behind the adversarial reviews, right? The first one might be at the PR level, right? Deciding whether we're going to let it go through to staging or whether we're going to elevate it to discussion. But the other one, which is just at the brief level, is about making sure that bringing back a brief that is well researched and that I can read and be informed about the questions at hand and be able to help make those decisions. Because what I never want to have to say is looks good to me. Because if I'm doing that, then I'm not really adding value, right? I want to say, oh, that's a tough problem. Let's talk about it. Let's, what research do you have about it? How do we think about that? So that I can then perhaps even further elevate the discussion beyond the way it was thinking about it before. And I find when I get to spend more of my time doing that, I enjoy it more and it gets more value. But I now use this adversarial review approach all the time. And I use that clustering approach, to sort of take multiple issues and look at them thematically and have them all get reviewed. And I use that all the time. Collectively, I call that the graveyard shift approach. And I'll do another video about that, right? But the key for me is that by having these 2 AIs work for me, it creates so much more value. So if you want to implement this, as I mentioned before, I've got the link to a current version of adversarial PR, which is my technical, adversarial process attached to the bottom of this video in the description. But if you're looking to sort of think about how do you do this from first principles, you're going to want usually to have the command line versions of alternative harnesses installed. That's the way I do it, right? So I can have my ChatGPT codecs, and that means I want to have Claude command line installed. I want to have, if I'm working with the Claude code in their app or anywhere, I want to make sure I have codecs, because it's still called codecs, installed at the command line. Because when I have the command lines available, it becomes just trivial, right? Because you can just run them in headless mode, in the working directory of your current repository, and then they just fire off. This is covered in the skill, but I also recommend using a high-end model as a reviewer. And there are a couple of cool tricks to this. The first cool trick is that using the smarter, is having the reviewer be smarter, is a little bit parallel to the more junior doing the work of the development, whereas the more senior is one doing the the code review or what have you. But the other is an economic trick. Because usually there are 2 kinds of tokens that you're going to deal with when you are working with these AI systems. There are input tokens and output tokens. And the input tokens are a lot cheaper than the output tokens. So the gag, to me, is that the coding system is, of course, generating lots of tokens, right? Because it generates code and, sets all that stuff up. But the reviewer doesn't need to generate nearly as many tokens, but it needs to read a whole lot more tokens. That means you get to use the cheap category of token for the more expensive model, which saves some money, at least as of this writing. And the author sort of is of course spending more tokens. So I'll often use like a workhorse model, like a sonnet, right? Or right now Luna Extra High on the OpenAI side, which is incredibly cheap at the moment, to do the actual creation of code. And then I'll use a higher end model like Opus or Fable or Sol on the OpenAI side to do the reviewing side. Interestingly, I find as of this writing, Gemini Flash is actually a pretty good reviewer and it's really cheap. So I'll often have it go make a call over to Anti-Gravity as opposed to making a call to Codex or to Claude. For a lot of these review jobs, that's worked out really well for me for most of my mainline cases. And when it gets like sort of a harder case and thinking about reshape, that's when I sort of kick it up and say, let's use some more Fable. But those are all sort of in the detail. I think if you just have it call the model across the street, I say send your business across the street, send the question across the street. And it will do that and there's no special / command or anything for it. It understands the metaphor. My skill uses that kind of language, and that's sort of the way I talk. And it calls it on the command line and is able to do that kind of review work. And I find when you do that review work, oh my goodness, it will certainly slow you down, right? Because the review for a bigger model is going to be a bit slower. Having it go back and forth chews up more time. But that wall clock time is well worth it because you get your time back. You get to make better decisions, and we get the AI to do more of what it does really well. So a couple considerations of when you don't want to use adversarial review. And I got really happy about using this. I've definitely run into situations where I don't understand what's taking so long when I'm trying to move fast, and the answer was this adversarial review stuff was kicking in. So there are a couple things that might not make it better. The first is if you're working with relatively small stuff. It can sometimes be to your advantage to say, I don't necessarily want to go through a big high-end review of this. In fact, this is a good reason to sort of take multiple changes or multiple PRs and stack them and get them reviewed at a go. This is something I'm experimenting with a little bit. The truth is a lot of the changes I have it make are relatively large and have that conceptual quality to them. So this has not been as big a deal for me of late as I've gotten more sophisticated with my development. But I'm sure it's going to be coming around again. I think that kind of batching will be sort of useful. You don't want to run this on one-to-one with everything because it will slow things down. It's using a big model to do things it doesn't necessarily need to do. That's probably worth consideration. But the thing that really has stuck me is there's a phase at which you're just doing rapid prototyping. And when you're doing rapid prototyping, you don't want every single turn of this to be stopped with adversarial review. So this is also why I take an approach of doing my skills as norms instead of rules. That the norm is that we're in production, we're trying to put the complex systems together, we're going to use adversarial review to be maintaining quality as we go. But when I'm doing rapid prototyping, skip it. The point is to bring it back to me. Because if I'm doing rapid prototyping, I want more of my eyes on it, right? The whole point is to be bringing it to me quicker. And to be elevating my own understanding and thinking about a given process or product or what have you. So when I'm doing rapid prototyping, I do not have adversarial review in the middle. I will have it bring stuff back to me, and if it breaks in the course of that, that's fine. It's early prototyping. The point is to be getting in front of me when it matters. And that is sort of the biggest takeaway I'd encourage from all of this is how do you get more of your attention on the parts of the system that matter? And that where you're going to be able to provide, good input to be providing guidance and in the whole of the build and the product management process. When you're providing good feedback and good decisions and good inputs and good reactions, then we're doing the job correctly, right? But when it just sort of keeps bouncing things back to you and you're forced to say looks good to me, then that's sucking up your time in a way that's not so good. But also, if it is slowing you down, if you're like trying to be in an interactive sort of inner loop type process, and it is doing this adversarial review in order to make sure what it's going to give you is quality before it comes back, that also might not be quite the right thing. So tuning it to what makes sense in terms of the rapidity that you want to be looking at the system, and and frankly your tolerance for error within that, I think will help you figure out when you do want to use this, right? When you are looking for order and stability, and when you're looking to thrive in the chaos of creation. And one way or the other, when I don't want to be in that scrum, right? I'll step back and say, you two robots, you two hash it out. Let them fight.